Davayin Ches Amud Aleph will begin Davayin Zayin Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. We learned previously that Yeshua, he holds Imein Basar Ein Dam, Imein Dam Ein Basar, that you need both parts of the korban to be tore in order to continue with the Avodah. The Gemara suggested that perhaps our Mishnah could be like Rav Yeshua, even though the Mishnah said that you could be makar the korbanos even though there was tumah, because Rav Yeshua said his din that you need both parts of the to be tore, that's only l'chalchila. But b'di'evid, if you were makriv, if the makriv the korban, then it's kosher. How do I know this? How do you know that Rav Yeshua differentiates between l'chachil and di'evid? The sign we learned in the Brisa, nifna basar shenifsal, if the basar became tamei, or nifsal became possible at full yom. V'shiyatsa chutz l'kloim, it went outside the malkum, it went outside the azora, beyond the curtains. Rabbi Elazar Amar Yizorek. Rabbi Elazar says, nevertheless, you can do the zrikas adam, because Rabbi Elazar, the shlit also, that says that we don't link the two together, and even though there's no basar, you can still do the zrikas adam. But Rabbi Yeshua lo yizorek. Rabbi Yeshua says you should not. Rabbi Yeshua the shlit also that says imein basar ein dam. But however, it says clearly umayde Rabbi Yeshua she'im zarak but he's minor. Then if you did it, b'di'evid, if you did the zrikas, it's accepted. So you see that Yeshua is machalik bin l'chachila di'evid. Correct the Gemara, how could you say that? Chada the psula di'evid mashma. Well, we learned previously where we had the case where the kaimetz and you had the mincha, then with the mincha, the shiraim became tamei before they are marked the kaimetz, then it says a lashon apostle. And chada the psula di'evid mashma. That's a lashon of b'di'evid. And I'll ask you another kasha, even if you're going to say that it's not possible, but it only means l'charchila. As Rashi points out, and we have to say that that's what it means. Meaning, even though it uses a lashon apostle, which normally means b'di'evid, here we can't say that because we just learned in the Brisa previously that Yeshua is machsharet b'di'evid. So therefore, we must say that it means that it's only l'charchila. But nevertheless, we still have a kasha, because our Mishnah says that the 5 things can come in a state of tumah, and the lashon is boim is a lashon l'charchila. So it's mashma that it can be even l'charchila brought in a state of tumah. So how can you say that that is consistent with Rav Yeshua? How can we reconcile that with Rav Yeshua? The Gemara answers, we must give a different teretz. So kasha can be yachid, can be tzibur. Our Mishnah is talking where it was tumah b'tzibur, and as opposed to what we were learning previously, we said beforehand that Rav Yeshua does not hold of tumah hutra b'tzibur, that it's only a das yachid. Now we're changing. No. That b'tzibur, Rav Yeshua holds tumah hutra b'tzibur. So if it's a case where there's a tumah with the tzibur became tamei, then we say even l'charchila. What Rav Yeshua over here in the Brisa is saying that it's only b'di'evid b'l'charchila you can't do it. That's by a yachid. That's where we say that it's in the case of a yachid. Therefore, we don't say that it's hutzah, that l'charchila you can be makriv. But nevertheless, if they were makrivit, b'di'evid, the tzitz is maratza, and therefore it's kosher. So we're saying l'maisa that Rav Yeshua says b'tzibur is mutar l'charchila, and our Mishnah is talking l'charchila. B'yachid l'charchila it's also, b'di'evid is mutar. Now the Gemara says, let's say our Mishnah will not be like the following sheet of Rabbi Yossi. The Sanya, Rabbi Elazar Aimer, Atzitz Meratza al Achilas. Rabbi Elazar says that Tzitz is Meratza on the Achilas, so therefore the Achilas, what's Nechal, the Tzitz is Meratza, and it's considered like it's completely Torah. Not that you can eat it, but it's considered completely Torah as far as continuing with the avodah, as being able to do the avodah. Rabbi Yossi Aimer says, "Einatzitz maratza lachilas." He says it's not maratza lachilas. So kasal kadaitach, the assumption is midaka amar Rabbi Yossi einatzitz maratza lachilas, since he's saying it's not maratza lachilas. Kerishua sphere leit amar bin atarting. Well, what's it nageya What's it negeya that it's maratz or not? Must be that he holds like Rabbi Shua, that you link together the dam and the basar. He mean basar ain't dam. And it must be that he holds like Rabbi Shua, that you need the basar to be betara, and therefore you need the two, and therefore it's negeya that it sits, whether it sits as maratz or not. And he's saying ain't sits maratz alachilos. So therefore, Nema Hashlam sits in Lord of Yaisi. So therefore, we must say that the Mishnah is not Lord of Yaisi, because if the tzitz is not Marata and you need the Achilas Basar, how can you be makraved in a state of Tumah? And our Mishnah says that you can. Where it says light. No, not necessarily. Rav Yaisi, Rabbi Elazar Svirlai, he doesn't hold like a Rishua. He holds like a Rabbi Elazar. Tamar Dam, Apal Pishain Basar. That says we don't link it together, and even if the basar is not Torah, you can do the avoid of the dam. And therefore, our Mishnah says that you can, could be perhaps like Rabbi Yaisi. Well, if you're saying that he holds like Rabbi Elazar and we don't link it together, so what's in the gay whether it sits as maratz on the chilas or not? You can do the avodah regardless. If he holds like Rabbi Elazar, even if it's Tomei, even if the basar is Tomei, you can still do the avodah. So what's it negeya whether it sits in the maratz? And why is he telling us that it's not maratz? Doesn't that show us that he doesn't hold like Rabbi Elazar? For example, tamech. Well, according to what you're reasoning over here is Rabbi Elazar. It sits maratz. Well, Rabbi Elazar himself says it sits maratz. Now we know Rabbi Elazar says that dam alpha pishain basar. We don't link it together. Well, Kevan Domer Dam Hafal Pishain Basar, it says Maratza Alachilas and my Elchasa. So what's in the gate to tell me whether it sits as Maratza? So obviously, even though we don't link it together, there is a relevance to whether it sits as Maratza or not. Ella lemikveh pegol or lafukim yedei mi'ila kemifligim. Elamai, it must be whether it's Maratza, not in terms of doing the avodah, because Rabbi Elazar says even if the basar is Tomei, that it's dam, alpha pishain basar. What's it negaya? Whether it's considered halachically, whether it's considered like the avodah was done, was completed, insofar as the halacha of pigel. Now, if a person does the avodah, he shafts with a machshava that he's going to eat the korban chutz l'zman, outside the time frame. Now, if he eats it, regardless within or without the time frame, he's chayiv kares. But it's only considered pigul. It's only considered pigul if the avodah was completed. The rest of the avodah was done in the proper way. Now, if you say, well, that it became tomei, and therefore it's not considered to be, there's no ritzoi, then the avodah was not done in the proper way. So even though as far as the halacha of the dam, that you can do the avodah of the dam afal pishain basar, but is it considered like it was done, completed b'tahara, that I should say, oh, there's pigol because the korban, he was mocked of the korbanon completely and totally bekashus, with the exception of the machshavas pigol. So the sits as meratze to therefore say that it is considered like the hakrova was done complete, and he is chayiv. It is considered pigol, and he's chayiv chorus reading it. Or lafukide meila. Meila is when the korban is, we have kuchik kochim. There's meila, if a person partakes with it, he has to know from the kochim, he's over meila. But once the hakrova is done, so then the basar becomes mutar la'achila. So it's meitzeh midei me'ila. It's not considered kachei Hashem. It's not considered completely kachei Hashem, and therefore there's no me'ila. Here also is the tzitz meratza to consider it like it was completed, and therefore it takes off the isser of me'ila. So that's the issue over here. Rabbi Elazar Sovar Maratza Tzitzalavei Mashalei Ketor. Rabbi Elazar says that tzitzis maratza, it's considered like it's Torah, it's considered like the hakrava was done completely, and therefore kavale bepigol, and therefore it establishes it as pigol. Umapikle midei mila, and it takes it out from the category of mila. It's considered like the hakrava was done in completion. But Rav Yosi Sabra Lo Meratza Tzitz Lavei V'Lo Mishav Like Tor, and Rav Yosi says it's not, and therefore it's not considered like it was Tor, and V'Lo Kavala B'Pigel, and therefore there's no Pigel V'Lo Mapikle Midain Meila. So that's what we're suggesting over here, that Rav Yosi does hold like a Rav Eliezer, that he holds that we don't link together the dam and the basar. But nevertheless, it's negeya whether the tzitz is maratza for these dinim, for the dinim of pigel and me'ilah, maskevlam remori. How can you say that? Nehi namid Rav Yosi Savra Rav Eliezer, even if you say that he holds that, like Rav Eliezer, that even if there was no basar, that we still say that dam afal pi shein basar. So therefore, we would say that as long as the dam is tahar, as long as it's not disqualifying the dam, even if the basar is, you can be makar the korban. But b'ishlam zvachim, we understand that, in as far as zvachim are concerned, that you can be makar the animal even though there's tumah because he kadam, and therefore there's dam, and the tzitz is maratza for the dam, and therefore you can be makar. So you have that component, you have the hakrava part of it, that aspect of it. The tzitz is maratza for that, even though the tzitz is not maratza for basar, but it's maratza for the part that's your makriv, and therefore you can bring it in a state of tumah. Oimer nami, and also as far as the oimer, ike kaimis, you have the kaimis component, which you're makriv on the mizbeach, that sits in the maratza, and therefore even the spatuma, you can be makriv. Lechem ponim nami, you also have a component that goes to the mizbeach, ika bazichen. You have the levoina, the spoonfuls of the levoina, which are makriv on the mizbeach. So we understand how therefore you can be makriv these korbanos in state of tumah. So if you want to reconcile our Mishnah with Rabbi Yosi, well, as far as these korbanos are concerned, we can understand why the Tana says you can be makriv in state of tumah. However, but the two shtei lechem of shuas, what are you going to say? There's no component that's your makriv on the mizbeach. Now, if you're going to say that the tzitz is not maratza for the edible parts of it, there is no haktorah part. There's nothing that's on the mizbeach over here. So how can you bring the shtei lechem in the state of tumah? Or maybe you'll say what it's referring to are the shlomim, the shlomim that accompanies them. So when we bring shtei lechem, we also bring the korbanos sibur, the two zivchei shlomim, and maybe you'll say that that's what it's referring to. So therefore, it says that since you're makriv the shlomim, and therefore you can do the avodah with the shtei lechem, you can do the tznufa with the shtei lechem. Gemara says no, but hainu shalmei tzibur. That is a case of the zvachim, that's shalmei tzibur. What are shalmei tzibur? That's a zivchei shlomim of shuas that accompany the shtei lechem. And if that's what it's referring to, you can have a arba. Vanan chamisha tanan. The Mishnah says there are 5 cases, and part of the list of 5, it lists separately the shtei lechem and the shalmei tzibur. Now, if you're telling me that the shtei lechem, it's only when it's in conjunction with the shalmei tzibur, but not independently, then you don't have 5 cases. You only have 4 cases. Allah the Gemara says, that we have to change our understanding. And the reason that it's permitted, that is because Tuma Hotra B'tzibur. When Rav Yosi says that the tzitz is not marasa, alachila is, that's negeya for the korban yachid. But when it's a korban sibur, you don't need the ritzui tzitz because he holds Tuma Hotra B'tzibur, and therefore a Mishnah is talking about korban sibur. And therefore, even if you don't have the ritzui tzitz, you can still bring the shtei lechem because tuma hotra b'tzibur is motor l'charchila tzibur. How can you say that about Tanya echad zeh v'echad zeh? That this is regarding the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur. So we prepare the kohen gadol 7 days before Yom Kippur. We prepare him for the avodah Yom Kippur. We prepare the kohen gadol before doing the avodah for the Or Aduma. then we prepare them in advance, and we want to make sure that they are in a state of tahara, and therefore mazan alav kol shiva. Mikol chatois shua hashoah yusham divramer. So Rameir says, so every day, we don't know, perhaps there was a Tumas Meis, we don't know what day of the Tumas Meis he was, maybe he was Tomei 7 days ago, maybe 14 days ago, whatever the case may be, 10 days ago. So for the entire 7 days, you do hazah, you sprinkle with him on the water mixed with the ash of the paraduma, each one of the 7 days that you sequester him. And from all the ashes that were there, not only the current one, but even from previous paradumas, and that's a chumrah, a maila that they made, and to make sure he's stored. That's what Rameir says. Rabbi Yossi Aimer, he says, no, ain't mazalav el shlishu v'shvi b'vad. He says only shlishu v'shvi. But nevertheless, you do the hazah. You make sure that he's stored. Now, if you say that he holds sumahutra b'tzibur, like we're suggesting now, therefore it's mutar l'charchila. Now, the avoid of Yom Kippur has to be done dafka with the kain gadol. So there's no alternative. So therefore, lama li hazah klal. Why would you need hazah? The tumah is not a factor. It's mutar l'charchila. Elamai, from the fact that he said you are mazeh, must be that he holds that tumah dechuya b'tzibur. It's only b'di'ev and not l'charchila. Where it says in chanami elam chavarta masnisin like Rav Yossi. You must say that our Mishnah is not like Rav Yossi, because we see Rav Yossi says tumah dechuya b'tzibur, not hutra b'tzibur. And he holds that the tzitz is not maratza, it's not maratza on the basa, it's not maratza on the edible parts. So therefore, our Mishnah, which says the shtei alechem can be brought in the state of tumah, is not like Rav Yossi. Amar le Rav Papa Labai. Now we had a statement that we brought down previously, which we did not explain, and now the Gemara is explaining it right now at this point. Rav Yossi shtar mezak lebei treyu. Rav Yossi, is he giving awarding a shtar to two people? Because in the Brisa, we had this puzzling statement that we brought down in the Brisa previously, and now we're going to explain. The same we learned in the Brisa, Amar Rav Yossi Royan is Div Rabbi Elazar bezvachim, that it appears to me what Rabbi Elazar said in the case of zvachim, and Div Rabbi Shua bezvachim, and what Rabbi Shua says in zvachim. Now, as we know, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shua argue, so how can you agree with both of them? And v'div Rabbi Elazar v'menachos, what Rabbi Elazar menachos, v'div Rabbi Shua v'menachos. So how could that be? So divrei Rabbi Elazar b'zvachim. What are the words of Rabbi Elazar b'zvachim? Shayam adam afal pi shein basar. He says that dam, you can do the avoid of the dam, even though the basar is tom, even though there's no meat. And divrei Yeshua b'zvachim shayamer im ein dam ein basar, and im ein basar ein dam. And the words of Yeshua says no, they're linked together. So clearly it's contradictory. And divrei Rabbi Elazar b'menachos, who says shayamer kaimetz afal pi shein shem shirayim. He said kaimetz, even though there's no shirayim, even though the shirayim, there's no shirayim, it's Tomei, you can still do the kaimetz. And divrei Yeshua b'menachas shayamer im ein sham shirayim ein kaimetz, im ein kaimetz ein shirayim. No, that they're linked together. So they're clearly contradictory. So what does this mean? Amar le mistaber kamar. Now, he's not saying what I agree and what I don't agree. That's not the understanding of Rayani. And it's not what he means to say over here. He means to say it's mistaber to say that what he says, what he's explaining what their opinions are. So mistaber to say that they hold their opinions both by zvachim and by menachos. As follows: Ki koi b'zvachim, when he was learning zvachim, the Masechta zvachim, Omar, he said, mistaber ki echad b'zvachim pligina b'menachos. He was saying it's mistaber to say, not what I hold, it's mistaber that what they hold, that just like they're arguing in zvachim, and they would, according to Rabbi Elazar, it's not linked together, and according to Yeshua, they are linked together, dam and basar. So too by menachos, that they would link together the kaimetz and they would link together the kaimetz and the shirayim. And kai b'menachos Samar, when he learned menachos, he said mistamer ki ech the pligi b'menachos pligi nam zvachim, that just like they argue with, in the case of the menachas, as far as linking together the kaimas and shiraim, they would also have the same machlokes by zvachim as whether you link together the dam and the basar. Amar Lehi says, well, it's understandable to say, like you're suggesting, that when they were learning Zvachim, that he wanted to clarify and say, just like they argue in Zvachim, they argue also in Menachos. That we would understand. The Iker Kroy, because the Iker pasuk, the limit, we learn it out from Zvachim. So we learn it out from Zvachim, so therefore you would have to clarify and say, it's mistaber to say that by Menachos, even though the Pesukim aren't referring to Menachos, they would argue in the same way by Menachos. But when learning Menachos, V'amar mistaber ki hecha, the pligi Menachos, pligi nam Zvachim, would he say that in mistaber say just like they argued Menachos, they would argue in Zvachim, V'ikar kroya, Zvachim would exceed. But the problem is Zvachim, so it's clear that they're arguing Zvachim, so why would he have to say that? So that's not what he means to say. Therefore, we have a different explanation. What he meant to say is that we're going back to our previous understanding. I agree. It's mistaber to me. I see what Rabbi Eliezer is saying, ben nitma, in the case of Tomei, v'divrei Yeshua b'oven v'sorah. I agree with what Rabbi Eliezer says by nitma, that it becomes Tomei, that we don't link them together, and you can proceed with the avoid of the dam, even though the basar is Tomei, v'divrei Yeshua b'oven v'sorah. But what Yeshua says that if it's ovid or sorah, if it's lost or burnt, it's non-existent, that you should not continue with the avoid. Ben Nitma, my time, why does he agree with Rabbi Eliezer in the case of Nitva, Mishum Deratzat Tzitz? Because of the Ritzui Tzitz. So it's considered like it's Tor. So you can go ahead and do the Avodas Hadam. So Hasham B'Leila Rav Yosef Damrei Tzitz Meratz Al Achilos. But Rav Yosef says, he himself says that Tzitz is not Meratz Al Achilos. So how can they therefore agree to Rabbi Eliezer? Ella, the Gemara says, like Kash. Roya ani as divrei Eliezer b'tzibur, and Roya ani as divrei Yeshua b'yochid. Elamai enechanam. We have to change our understanding. Meaning, what he meant to say is that I agree with Rabbi Eliezer says b'tzibur. Since tuma chutra b'tzibur, therefore I agree with Rabbi Eliezer says b'tzibur, and you can go ahead and do dazos sadam, even though the basar is tummy. But by yochid, since he holds that Ein Sitz Meratza, like we just said, that L'chadchila you can't proceed. So B'tzibur, my time, why do you say B'tzibur? You could do it Mishum de Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, because Tumah's Hutra B'tzibur. What do you mean? We know, we just learned that Rav Yossi holds, no, it's not Hutra B'tzibur, it's only Dechuya. It's only reluctantly, it's only B'di'evet, not L'chadchila. And secondly, if you're going to say that we're dealing with a tzibur, Rabbi Eliezer machshir lo Rav Yeshua, it's only Rabbi Eliezer that's machshir, not Rav Yeshua. We just said, Amra b'tzibur afil Rav Yeshua maida. You said that even b'tzibur, even Rav Yeshua's maida, that it's l'chadchila, that it's chutram. Ella, what's the pshat? Ella royani div Rabbi Eliezer b'di'evet v'divrei Yeshua l'chadchila. Elamai, what he meant to say is that Royani divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'di'evet. Then I agree with Rabbi Eliezer that b'di'evet is kosher, but divrei Yeshua l'chadchila, that l'chadchila is not. That l'chadchila is not kosher. What do you mean? Gemara, affect the Gemara. Di'evet afili Yeshua nami moide. We see Roya divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua says that it's only l'chadchila, but b'di'evet is moter. So what do you mean that he's Roya divrei Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Yeshua also himself says that b'di'evet it's moter. Diktani moide Rabbi Yeshua shim zorak hortza. He says if there was rigas hortza. More answers. No, there's a chilik. Ha betuma, ha ba'ovid v'sarif. There's a difference between tuma and ovid v'sarif. It was lost or burnt. Ki katana might Rav Yeshua shim zorak hortza. Where did Rav Yeshua say that b'di'evet it's hortza, that it's kosher? That's dafka ben nitma. That's dafka in the case ben nitma, because you have the ritzui atzitz. So therefore, even though he holds that we linked the two together, but the tzitz in the case of tumas meratza, but aval ba'ovid v'soraf loy. But in a case where it's Ovid Asaraf, Rabbi Yeshua would hold that even b'di'evad it's possible. Now, Kikam Rav Yosi Roy Ani Esti Rabbi Eliezer. Now, when Rav Yosi says that he agrees to the words of Rabbi Eliezer, b'di'evad, he's talking about b'di'evad, and then when does he agree with him? That's Ovid Asaraf. In a case where Ovid Asaraf, where in such a case Rabbi Yeshua would say that it's possible even b'di'evad, here Rabbi Yosi says, I agree with the words of Rabbi Eliezer. I agree with the words of Rabbi Eliezer that b'di'evad and by Ovid Asaraf that it is kosher, because even though we have the principle, and he agrees with Rabbi Yeshua that im ein shirayim ein kaimes, but he argues on him because he says that's only lechatchila. But b'di'evad, I would not link the two together. I don't say im ein shirayim ein kaimes as far as b'di'evad is concerned. So therefore, he says that as far as b'di'evad, it would be kosher. So therefore, in summary, Rabbi Eliezer says we don't link together. We don't say im ein basar ein dam, and therefore it's mutar lechatchila. Rabbi Yeshua says we do link the two together. However, by a korban tzibur, we say to mutar b'tzibur. By a korban yochid, we say, even though we say im ein basar ein dam, but as far as tumah is concerned, we say that tzitz meratza. But if it's Ovid Asaraf, it's possible b'di'evad. Rav Yosi says, yes, we do link the two together, but he says ein tzitz meratza, the tzitz is not meratza. However, he holds, at least as far as menachos are concerned, as far as Zvachim, it's a machlekes in the Rishonim, but at least as far as menachos are concerned, he holds that im ein shirayim ein kaimes, that's only a lechatchila requirement, but b'di'evad would be kosher.